Today on Pockets of Joy, my guest is Jody O'Neill, writer of the award-winning play What I Don't Know About Autism. Dive into this pocket of joy as we discuss our shared neurodivergence, our experiences of labour and birth as women on the spectrum, how Jody makes time for self-care, her writing process, creating accessible experiences in the arts, and the social model of disability. The video version is on the Wellness Clinic's YouTube channel. Enjoy. Good morning, Jody. I'm just cleaning off my lens.
Yeah, no bother. How are you?
And I have a dog in the room with me and 3 kids in the house and no one to help. So if I have to go off and sort someone out, I
Yeah,
will.
just do it. Yeah, 100%. Yeah,
Yeah.
I just have the cat at the moment. And she's very much asleep. So yeah, all should be good.
Lovely. So let's begin. We
Yeah.
go back. I was just looking back over my Facebook Messenger. We go back like to when your son was born, 12 years ago, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, 12 and a half years.
Yeah, but we have never met in real life, but we kept saying, oh, we'll meet for a coffee, and the years passed, and this is actually our first time speaking live, so this is lovely.
Yeah, it is lovely. And I was thinking about that this morning. I was like, because I'm not one of the people who goes, oh, let's meet for a coffee and then we don't meet for a coffee. Like I'm really good at it, but it's just the circumstances, isn't it, that we haven't managed to actually connect it.
I
So
know.
yeah, we'll follow it up with a coffee maybe.
We will. I'd love that. And
Yeah.
thank you for coming on the podcast. I'm delighted to have you. You are so accomplished. You're an award-winning writer and you're a performer as well. So I'd love to chat to you about your work, about your advocacy for autism, and maybe how you came to it. What's your personal story, if you don't mind sharing a few details, and where relevant, I'll bring in my experience too. I think there are so many people who are privately messaging me now that I'm more open about my diagnosis, and they're saying things like, oh, my kids have just been diagnosed, or I think I might be on the spectrum too. Where do you go? What do you do? And I'm kind of sending links and resources to people. So I think it's something, thankfully, it's become, more mainstream. But I think when you were starting out, I certainly didn't think your play was relevant to me way back when you brought it out first. I was like, oh, that's not my thing. I'm not autistic. And I'm actually textbook autistic.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah, I think up until like even around the time I was diagnosed, which would have been 2019, there was an idea of autism as being one thing, I
Mm-hmm.
suppose, and it being, what you like would typically see in a Google search, or like watching things like Rain Man was probably the
Oh, yeah.
most famous piece of art about autism at that point. And I think like the culture has really, really shifted, and things like that book Neurotribes by Steve Silverman, who unfortunately passed away last week, but that was a game changer for so many, and for so many people in to self-identify as autistic, but also so many autistic people to really step out of the community and self-identify. And so I think that the landscape has completely shifted in the
Yeah.
last 5 years. Like it's one of the fastest changing things, I think, at the moment, which is really interesting and really exciting, because we don't know where the next 5 years will take us either.
Yeah. Oh my God, I have so many questions. So I don't know his book, but I've heard it mentioned. But now everyone is talking about Unmasking Autism by Devon Price, which I read
Okay.
and I wasn't blown away by. I didn't really identify with. And do you know what it is? I have combined type ADHD as well, which wasn't officially diagnosed, but it was screened for as part of my autism diagnosis. So I think that particular neurotype, the ADHD neurotype, is quite different to just an autistic framework as well. Could you talk a little about that? And maybe are you also ADHD, or do you think you might be, or where do you sit on the spectrum?
Yeah, so I was diagnosed as autistic. That was very much the kind of first label I came to, because again, for another like 4 years, I had ADHD as something like completely different to what it is in my head. Um, on the first day back at school last week, I left my car key on top of the car, went into town on the Dart, thinking I was really calm about back to school and everything. And I was so together. And I went to a meeting and like knew that I didn't have my car key. And only when I got to the meeting in time was like, I need to find out where the car key is. And called somebody who then informed me that I had left it on top of the car, which there's been a couple of things that have happened recently where I've been like, oh, okay, this might be actually a dual diagnosis. That sounds very glib, but there's lots of things that would kind of point towards ADHD as well for me. I think that probably as a child I would have represented in a very classically sort of, what's been known as a kind of a female autistic presentation of being extremely compliant, being, you know, exceptionally bright in school, exceptionally keen to like model my behavior on
Mm.
other people. So I think that as I have shed that, and I'm still shedding that, and I think like that's like lifelong work, and some masking is useful as well. I think it's really important to kind of acknowledge that, because I think people feel a pressure now that they have to be their authentic autistic self all of the time,
Mm-hmm.
and actually sometimes it's not safe to be that.
Yeah.
And sometimes actually knowing how to mask is a really useful skill. But as I strip back the kind of the compliance, it's like a lot of other stuff there that would point towards maybe ADHD. And actually, as I learn more and as I experience more and understand more, I don't know how useful those diagnostic labels are. I mean, I think they're useful at the moment, but I think they're outdated. They're associated with all kinds of negativity in terms of like, you know, the parallels between autism and eugenics in the 40s when it was kind of first coming into um like a diagnostic criteria, a diagnosis, I guess. So I think it's really important to bear in mind that, like, as with education, as with medicine, we're functioning within a flawed model, and
Mm-hmm.
very few people are just one thing.
Yeah.
And so we try to, and that can like really contribute to people feeling like that sense of imposter syndrome of like, well, I'm not that autistic, but I kind of feel like I'm not like everybody else, but I also have this bit of ADHD. Is that those things are they're clinical tools. They're
Yeah.
not they're not ways of describing a human or the experience of being a human on a planet that's not built to fit your needs. So I think that's really it's yeah, I think that it's been very helpful for me in my 40s to understand why my life has been the way it has been to this point, and then also to make plans going forward for how I'd like my life to be with an awareness of what my access needs are. But the kind of names are being like one thing or another thing and only that, um, I think doesn't always serve a really useful purpose and can actually alienate people sometimes.
I totally agree. And I could see in the next 5 years, they may just get rid of all those single
Mm.
labels that include as well. Let's just discuss a few of the labels that are under the neurodivergent spectrum or umbrella. We've got bipolar, we've got OCD, ADHD, ADD, ASD, ASC, autism, depression, all everything really that comes under the mental health, description.
Yeah, absolutely. And then some things like dyslexia and dyspraxia as well, which are also
Hugely. Yeah. Yeah.
neurodivergences. So I mean, yeah, the reality of neurodivergence is so vast. And the experience of people is very seldom just one thing or the other. So I
Yeah.
think we will like hopefully move towards a better model that
Yeah.
suits more people, and where people what my son calls it is people should have the right to have their personal needs met. And some people's personal needs are different to others, but they should be identified and they should be met, and then that person can play a meaningful role in society.
Absolutely. And, you know, there are so many different variations and grades of how things can show up in me, from week to week of the cyclical month with my hormones and with
Hmm.
my age as a woman in my 40s. I know my pregnancies were and my births were, I experienced them differently to someone who would not be on the spectrum. And I knew instinctively home birthing was for me. I knew I would not be able to relax and let go in a hospital surrounded by strangers because I don't feel safe in that situation. I knew I would feel safe at home with one caregiver who was my midwife. And even when the midwife changed on me for my third pregnancy, I had huge issues around trusting somebody new, and I didn't want her. I was nearly going to go off and do it in a field on my own in the moonlight. Like, I was really like, I felt it on such a deep level, whereas other people that I saw just blase, oh, I'm in hospital, I'm grand, the baby came out, or I had a C-section, whereas I was like, God, this is like, it was all encompassing for me, especially preparing for my births and advocating
Yeah.
to even have a home birth in Ireland is such an achievement, because you're battling. I was going public, you're battling a system. I had bullying from a staff member in the HSE coming up to my third birth, which was causing me a lot of anxiety as well. So, oh my God, it was huge. And as a woman, I mean, the whole forgetting your key on top of the car, you might say, oh, I'm in my 40s now, it's perimenopause, it's hormones, I'm a bit absent-minded. but there are so many tiny ways that I'm reminded day to day of all my needs. And I feel like I've had to really create and craft a life. And I've been doing it from day one. I've always instinctively known I need to work for myself. I need to homeschool my children. I need to home birth my children. I've kind of always been led towards things that suited me. But I could see if you didn't have the, I suppose, luxury of being able to make those choices, and you were pushed into a school system and then into a job that didn't suit you, how very different your life would be, and how different your stress levels it would be, and it would affect everything.
And that's so interesting that you had all those instincts, because I think I have them now a little bit more, but I certainly didn't have them when I was pregnant. I certainly didn't have them when I was beginning my career, and so everything for me became about okay, well, my instinct is this, but I have to do this. So this
Yeah.
is the thing that I have to do. Um, and I hadn't, like, I've only been kind of recently reflecting in terms of like neurodivergence and pregnancy and birthing, but like I had no idea that I was in labor. So I almost didn't get to the hospital because I'm quite hyposensitive in certain ways. So I have a really they call it like a high pain threshold,
Mhm.
but like also the way that people describe things isn't necessarily how I experience them. So when I was like really late into labor, I had my son like 10 minutes after we got to the hospital. And I walked the last bit because I was like, I'm not, not staying in the car anymore. We had a friend staying on our sofa who ended up driving us to the hospital. And but I had no way how to, I had no idea. I didn't have any language around that. I didn't have any sense of the fact um, that my sensory experiences were different. And that's a
Mm.
really, really important thing, is that in medicine, like a lot of the time they ask you to like rate your pain on a scale. And I'm like, yeah, but what is your scale? What's my scale? I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
I don't even know if I'm in pain. So it's a really important and interesting conversation to have, I think, and to then, as you learn about yourself, to actually unpeel the layers of what other people's expectations have been, and therefore the expectations that you've had of yourself are, and to like try to kind of do a fairly rigorous search for what it is at the core of everything you really want,
Yeah.
and you really, really feel are the things that are gonna meet your needs.
And it's so hard to get to that point, because how many of us have that time or space or ability to access right down deep into what we need or
Yeah.
want? I'm working through that at the moment. I have an inner circle. It's like a members club I've started up. It's free to join. Anyone's welcome. I'll leave the link below. And I'm trying to get people to peel back the layers of what they're doing in their day to day to get to really what they want to be doing, and bringing more of that into their daily life so they feel joyful and happy every day, even on a rainy Tuesday, you know. I think it's really important, but we're so distracted, we're so busy, we're so put upon by our responsibilities. And I think the patriarchy has a lot to answer for in the terms of the mental load women still carry in the home.
Mm-hmm.
We very rarely get to say, actually, this is what I want to do, and allow ourselves to do it. Even 20 minutes reading a book is a luxury some people never get to see in their busy week.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
and if we did more of it, I think we would be more in tune with ourselves. And then we'd have the ability to say, actually, I don't want to go to that party, or I'll only stay an hour, or I can't help you out today because I need to come down from this high stress level. But I think we're so used to just operating on that high level, we don't ever get to step out of it.
Yeah, I think I spent quite a few years operating really at breaking point
Mm.
capacity.
Yeah.
And in the last year, I've sort of re-examined what those priorities are, and re-examined how I like have how I structure my working day, and what
Mm.
needs to be done around not just my parenting commitments and domestic commitments, which is what I was doing before, but around actually what are the things that I need in order to kind of start to make a sustainable life in a way.
Yeah.
Because I was always functioning around, okay, let's just get to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, rather than going, at a certain point my health is going to be a really critical thing, and how well I am mentally, how well I am physically as I come into my 40s and 50s, or go through my 40s and into my 50s and 60s. um I'm doing damage actively now
Yeah.
that I want to not do, and to start like undoing a little bit, or at least kind of laying a path of repair. So I might now these days get up at 5 some days in order then to facilitate, okay, I'm going to go to the sea, I'm going to go for a yoga class, I'm going to, and to make those choices, and for them not to be, selfish choices in a way, which is like, I'm aware of like how like myself now to myself 5 years ago sounds extremely privileged and entitled. But those are the things I think that are going to carry me through, and I have worked really hard to get to that place, but I'm still only recognizing how critical they are, because they slip there.
Yeah.
You have to kind of keep hanging on to them, and then you start to kind of question the validity of them and making those choices, and should I not be doing that? But I think yeah, they've just become sort of lifeboats in my life.
Yeah. I think that's so important. I've been saying this from the start of my business when I started the wellness clinic in 2015, 2016. Self-care was at the heart of my work, and it still is. And I'm still battling, with people. I go in and I do a talk in a workplace, or I work with a group of women, and we feel that it's selfish to do something for ourselves. And we've no role models. We never saw the older generations looking after themselves. Maybe the men went off and played golf on a Saturday, and maybe they still do. But we never saw our moms with their feet up reading the paper or having a cup of tea. They were always bustling around doing everything, to the detriment of their own health and well-being. So we are breaking that cycle in our generation by realizing I have to put myself first, because the other option is burnout. Have you experienced burnout yourself? Or like I used to have it regularly when my children were young. And for me, it looked like just a day or two of exhaustion where I was literally nonverbal. I know that now that I'm semi-verbal, semi-mute, whatever you want to call it. I have a limit of words per day, whether they're words that I take in from media I consume, or words that I have to listen to people talking to me, or words I'm speaking. And once I've reached that limit, just the way if I go out in high heels, there's a limit of steps I can take before I need to take off the shoes. I'm done. And, from 5 or 6 p.m., I'm in my bed, chilling out, reading, sleeping, napping, but I'm done by that stage. And I homeschool kids. So, my burnout level is still coming up, but I now know I need to seek out like silence and solitude in order to recharge. So have you experienced burnout before, and what does it look for you?
Yeah, I think I did experience burnout, but I think I wasn't aware of it
Yeah.
being burnout at the time, because I think, again, the reality of being a parent a lot of the time is that you can't just stop. Most of the time you're not able to just stop. But I remember a couple of years where I was just numb, where I felt like remember being in situations where I felt like I have nothing to give. There's like nothing I can contribute. And I would be around, my closest friends, and feel that sense of remove. So like I'll get a kind of a sort of a short-term burnout thing where like at the end of a project, I'll literally just have to spend a day with a book. And
Yeah.
that's it. I'm not really going to move, not really going to interact hugely. But the relationship is between me and the page, and it's like a kind of a feeding after a time of giving a lot. But I when I look back now, I would say that was kind of a burnout. And that it was things like sea swimming and yoga and meditation that brought the joy back in, that brought kind of like going the little tiny, because it was around the time that my career was getting really successful, and this is a terrible thing to say in public, but I remember getting funding for something and being like, oh, like now
Oh,
I've
yeah.
got to do that. And now I've got a responsibility to like all these other people that were in that application, that we have to do this now. And I realized I didn't want to work like that. I don't want to work for the sake of continuing to make things. We live in a capitalist society, so there is a responsibility to, like, I'm not a house owner, I pay rent every month. So there is that kind of short-term urgency in respect to income and being able to, have a stable home and have a stable living environment and provide good food and all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, I had to relook at, okay, finding like the tiny moments of joy, like whether that's like, water on a leaf, or, a minute with the cat, or um time with myself, time in nature, time with my son. But to not gloss over that bit and look at that bit as just as important. as all the other stuff, because you can't do the other stuff fully without that other side. I don't think you can
Yeah.
anyway. I think I probably wasn't functioning like on kind of a full creative tank at that time.
I think that's so common. And I think people forget to look at those moments as the precious joys that they are, that we gloss over them, as you say, or we ignore them and think they're not important. Oh, I'll pet the cat later, I'll cuddle my son later at bedtime. And we're putting them off in favor of our big responsibilities, the ones that bring the money in. What would you love to be doing in an ideal world if money were no object? And let's say we didn't have a capitalistic society where we had mortgages and bills and transactional relationships. What would you love to be doing? I'd love to be the healer woman. I would be growing herbs and making tinctures and medicines and healing people who were sick. That would be my dream, if I could just be pottering in a little hut in a forest, barefoot in my homespun capes. That's literally my escapist fantasy.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What would you love to be doing? What would you if the tribe like? Because I know, especially neurodivergent people, we feel like there's an alternate universe where I could be that person if I didn't have to show up in this capitalist society.
Yeah, like I'm really lucky at the moment. At the moment, I would be doing what I'm doing. In an ideal world, I would be doing a little bit less of some things and a little bit more of other things. So the proportions would change a little bit. But you know, I spend time in the sea almost every day. I spend time in some kind of yoga practice almost every day. I I like writing. I don't actually write every day, which is probably not great as a writer, but I engage in some kind of creative practice, I think, every day. A huge passion for me is like access to an arts experience for people who don't always have access to it. So in my work now, I have a show coming up in the theatre festival, and it's for young audiences and family audiences, but it's kind of for anybody. But one of the really key parts of that is embedding you know, audio description and captions and sign language interpretation across it in an artistic way rather than in just a functional way. So I would love to spend a couple of years like really, really digging into what the possibilities are there, and then really telling other people about it so that other people can see the importance of it and do it in their own work and discover that actually we can make better art if we consider everybody that it could be for, rather than just the kind of traditional kind of arts engaging audience. So I would be doing a little bit more of that. Um, and collaborating, like that's kind of the big thing for me, is working with other people in whatever capacity. Like even in office jobs, it's just always been about uh, collaboration in a way that's like meaningful on a personal level, I suppose, as well as a professional level.
Yeah, that's so important. And
Mm.
did you find that during COVID, the opportunities for collaboration increased with Zoom calls and everything? Or did you find it was more isolating for you as a creator?
Um, it was kind of a bit of both, because at the time my son would have had like quite high support needs during that time. So I felt it was both isolating from the point of view of being a parent, but inclusive from the point of being an artist. So it was kind of it was a tricky one, but actually it taught me not to apologize so much and not to be apologetic when somebody comes into a room, because they have a right to be there. And also to question myself and my own kind of sense of propriety and like awkwardness around being kind of split in my focus. So it was a learning curve for sure, but there were lots of groups during that time. There were lots of offers made. So I have kind of an issue with seeing myself on a screen. So I had to get over that. And so that was a tricky one to get over. But once I did, I was able to kind of engage meaningfully in like a number of kind of writing initiatives and workshops and things like that. And I have work in development now that would have started during that time, but also relationships with working relationships with people now that also started during that time. And I run an online peer group for neurodivergent artists once a month. And again, that kind of, I wouldn't have imagined that that was possible if it hadn't been for COVID, and that kind of discovery that accountability is something that's really important to me in my practice. So it's much more helpful for me to know that there's somebody on the other end of a Zoom call and I've told them what I'm doing and that I'm going to do it in the next hour and a half. And then I'm so much more likely to get it done than if I'm just accountable to myself. Then I don't have that. I find it much more easy to jerk off that responsibility.
Yeah.
But so that building that into a practice was something that I took away from COVID.
That's brilliant. And do you find that in general, social media has been, because when we were talking at the start today about the increase in people who are identifying as neurodivergent, I would thank social media for that. And I know people complain about social media, and it is a time suck, and doom scrolling can eat away at chunks of your day. Although I've been really good and really disciplined about not doing that now. So I post and ghost, which is a phrase I love. I'll put something up on Facebook or Instagram and I will not go and check in on it ever. So I'm not kind of looking through my feed really at all much. But what I think I've seen, especially in the younger generations, is how they use social media and how it's been essential for people to be able to find their tribe and learn, oh God, I'm not the only one who feels like this or who hates that or who has sensory issues. Like I have learned more through following other neurodivergent creators online than I ever did with any of my official research, because I found I couldn't relate to an abstract description of anything. I need someone to tell me, when I touch something slimy on a plate, it grosses me out and I get shivers through my body. And I'm like, oh God, that's me. That's a sensory issue. Whereas when I read about sensory issues, I couldn't relate. I thought I was autistic with no sensory issues. Turns out I have a ton. My whole life is sensory issues and avoiding them. So what do you think about social media in general for neurodivergent people?
Yeah, I mean, I think like the internet was the beginning of the neurodivergent communities, like people coming together um, online and in safe spaces and finding each other and finding those commonalities. Um, I find social media really, really tricky. I fear sometimes for people who are very young and have like a very significant social media presence that that's kind of something that then follows you and it doesn't give you, people change and we change and we want different things at different times. And in a sense, sometimes that kind of internet presence or YouTube presence or social media presence can become a kind of a ghost that then shadows you, and it may not be something that you always want to embrace. So I'm really grateful because there's a ton of people who really changed the way that I saw the world. And you're right, it's through that personal accessibility of things where you go, oh yeah, I'm like that too. And finding that relatability and finding that sense of being part of a community and part of a tribe. But I do worry that it makes people extremely vulnerable. So I'm extremely grateful to the people who are brave enough to do it. And then sometimes I find the pressure and the kind of, one of the first groups that I was involved in online was a social group for autistic people. And I see people kind of burn out of that group sometimes. And I get, I get concerned for the fact that social media is so reactive and it doesn't react in a real world way. And people say things there that they wouldn't say if they were looking at you or if they were in front of you or in a cafe or in another context. So I 100% appreciate the value of it. I am somebody who then like I can get addicted to almost anything. So like I have to mostly steer clear of it.
Yeah.
But I think it can also be like a really creative outlet for people and things like, TikTok and that there is art being made in those domains that couldn't be made elsewhere. So I'm like very much on the fence, on the social media fence. Yeah. But I mean, it's here, so it's not going anywhere.
Yeah, I think it's like we're all like adults with a new toy, or it is a new toy. And we don't have rules really around it. But I think, I don't know, it's tricky, especially having children now who have phones, who have social media accounts. At the start I was policing everything and checking up on their phones, and now I'm kind of trusting they'll come to me if they need support or run something by me. And we've made everything okay. So if you see something or someone sends you something, you're never in trouble for it. Just tell us and we'll figure it out, But we're learning along with our children, because even social media changes so much from year to year, the platforms and how they work and everything. It's tricky. Can we talk a little about your relaxed performances with your play? Were you one of the first people to bring relaxed performances in? And can you explain what they are for people listening who don't know?
Yeah, of course. So the first relaxed performances that I did were of a show called Yellow, that was part of Home Theatre Ireland that Dreacht in Dublin 15 did as an event in 2017, I think. But I think Dreacht had been doing relaxed performances of their pantomime for a good few years before that. So it was, and I think the first relaxed performances were an access tool for families who wanted to be able to go to the panto all together. And so it started with very simple adaptations, like it's okay, in panto, it is okay for the audience to make noise, but it's really okay. And it's really okay to move around. It's, it's about kind of moderating the bits that would be potentially scary in panto, or like taking down the sound a little bit so it's not as loud. Um, and taking out sort of potentially kind of sensory triggering lighting effects, and also not plunging people into any blackouts, because that can be a really scary experience, I think, for many people, not just for neurodivergent people, but it's scary to be like in the brightness and then completely in the dark with a room full of strangers. So um when I think about relaxed performance, I try to think about it in the context of the work that I'm presenting, rather than writing a piece and then making it a relaxed performance. So I try to think about, okay, what's the unique audience engagement with this play, and how do we invite people to advocate for themselves within the context of seeing this show? And I think what people don't realize sometimes, unless you experience it, is just what a barrier the kind of expectations around theatre etiquette can be. So you're supposed to go, you're supposed to sit in the seat you've been told to sit in, you're supposed to not move, you're supposed to like fit into the seat in a particular way, you're supposed to only react at the times that it's appropriate to react and when everybody else is reacting, and then stop at the right time. So there's like this, all these kind of hidden things that I think for some people mean they don't go into a theatre space because they're afraid of getting it wrong.
Mm.
And they're afraid that they won't be able to be there. And if they find that they're not able to be there, they won't be able to leave, and they won't be able to come back in again. So um, what I try to do is make the version of the make most of my plays relaxed performances, where so it's not an adaptation. Everybody who comes to see that show is in a relaxed performance. Everybody has the right to stim, the right to leave, the right to come back in again. Um, a really big part of it is the kind of preparation for the experience. So I would usually try to have a visual guide available in advance that tells a bit about the show, shows the costumes, shows the theater, shows the things about that theater that are different from other theaters, maybe. So, where their toilets are, what their kind of box office setup is, how to book a ticket, all of those things that we don't, you know, the expectation is that we can do them without effort and without an energy spend. And actually, it's a really big thing. Like for me to make a phone call
Mhm.
is can be a really big thing on certain days. And so recognizing that, and sometimes as well, like giving away the ending, like that can be a really
Oh,
important thing. And people get really like, oh no, but you can't do that. But actually you can, because most stories we kind of know the ending to anyway. It's about like how they're going to get there is the most interesting thing. And for a lot of I think this is like somewhat autism specific, but a lot of autistic people don't like surprises. So there's a real satisfaction. Like I used to always read the last chapter of a book first, and then like see how it arrives there, because there's a real like satisfaction and kind of closure in that experience, and also in knowing that like for the duration of the time I'm not worried that somebody's in jeopardy, and that somebody's, because most neurodivergent people have a kind of a nervous system that's on high alert most of the time. And then if you add in like somebody on stage, you having worry for them at the same time, it can mean that you can't process, and you can't hear, and you can't listen, and you can't engage, and you can't experience. So usually we'd have like a fairly thorough plot synopsis as well. Um, so yeah, those are some, like there's lots of different ways of doing it. And I think people are afraid to do it sometimes because they think, oh, we don't have the resources, we don't have capacity to provide a quiet room or a sensory room. But I think you can do a relaxed performance with kind of what you have, and is like better to have it and to not do it perfectly, and to get feedback from people so that you can do it better the next time, than not to do it at all, and then to exclude a whole bunch of people from that experience and from something that might really influence their life.
That's brilliant. And I bet you're seeing people coming to your shows that haven't been to a theater in years. What's the
Yeah.
feedback like in general?
Yeah, I mean, usually people are really appreciative, I think, of the opportunity. Sometimes it's people bringing their children to the theater for the first time. Sometimes it's people going themselves to the theater for the first time since they've been like a very, very young person and had an experience that made them never go back to the theater. I think what's interesting for me is that a lot of non-disabled and neurotypical people would come and go, actually, I hadn't realized how uncomfortable I am in these settings until you took away all the things that I was uncomfortable with. So it can be a really good empathy exercise in terms of going, um, okay, well then imagine that ratcheted up and imagine how much it's needed in other kinds of environments. So the only thing that people have ever not liked was that for some shows, we've asked people not to clap at the end. And that was for a really specific reason in Yellow, and then similarly in What I Don't Know About Autism. And people kind of say, oh, I found the experience of not clapping very uncomfortable. But that's a really good experience, to be uncomfortable and to kind of feel, okay, yeah, I had that impulse and I couldn't do it, because actually the experience of being neurodivergent in the world is a lot of the time I'm having an impulse and I'm not allowed to do it. So I think it's an empathy um it's an empathy thing. And I think generally people are really positive about relaxed performances, and specifically like acknowledging that people with sensory differences as children grow up to be adults with sensory differences. And so that kind of access shouldn't stop with young people's theatre. We should have accessible performances should include relaxed performance across all ages.
Yeah.
Um, so that we can just make that experience more comfortable. And I think COVID helped with that as well, actually, because people really had that experience of coming back to public spaces and going, oh God, I don't know how to be around people anymore.
Yeah.
And so there's a different kind of understanding and appreciation of why it's needed, I think, in the last few years.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
You've just really hit the nail on the head for me with so many of my issues with being in a theater. And one of the biggest ones, and you haven't mentioned it yet, is I hate sitting right next to a stranger and smelling them and feeling them move against my arm. It's gross. And I will only think about them the whole way through. I won't even be listening to the
mm,
show. I'll be so conscious of somebody I don't know right beside me in my personal space. Is there an accommodation for that in your relaxed performances?
yeah, that's actually that's an interesting one. It usually we have capacity at 70% of
Ah,
usual capacity, but I'm thinking to Dublin Theatre Festival and another festival that we have coming up, and going, have we made that provision? So I need to look into it. Um, but a lot of because that would be something that would be a discomfort for me. It's like, and similar on public transport,
mm,
that the kind of unpredictable behavior and sensory experience of the person right next to me
yeah.
can be a tricky thing. But something that I sort of usually try to accommodate is like people needing to sit near an edge, or things like that, I think are really, really important.
And other things I need to do, and what's put me off theater is like in the cinema, you can put your feet up on the seat. You can eat, because eating is such a stim and such a relaxation thing. Can you eat in your performances, or put your feet up, or sit sideways with, you know, can you kind of,
Yeah, I think like, so relaxed performance generally like allows for people to move around, to do what they need to do in terms of in terms of advocating for their kind of physical needs in the environment. Eating comes down to the sort of venue policy, so that's not something that I would generally have kind of control over. But I do I totally hear you that it can be a really important part of that experience. And then it's kind of like recognizing that sometimes there's a clash of access needs. So sometimes,
mm,
somebody putting their feet up for somebody who's OCD is going to be like a massive thing, because all of a sudden that's like contamination alarms going off in their head, 1000%. So it's kind of trying to as best we can. And like I say, it's probably never perfect, but the main thing, I think, with relaxed performance in a way is just knowing that it's having that autonomy, but also knowing that somebody else isn't going to give out to you, because we get very kind of self-righteous and very sort of self-policey as audiences. And sometimes, so it's actually just sometimes about the rest of the audience having the information that it's okay if that person puts their feet up. It's okay if they need to check their phone. It's
Mm.
okay if they do need to eat something. It's like that those things are um because we feel very protective towards performers sometimes, and actually performers are generally very robust and well able to deal with, you know, the like a small flash of a phone screen if somebody needs it,
Yeah.
and if we've acknowledged that that's an access need for somebody. So it's kind of recognizing that access doesn't always look the same, and like and can look different at different times for different people. So it's really complex, and there's so much. So yeah, if I did have my ideal world scenario, there'd probably be a whole other like bit of work to do exploring that area.
It's fascinating how many different, I never even considered the phone as an access need. So it's amazing how many ways that can show up for people, all the myriad of things people might need in order to be comfortable for that
Yeah.
length of time. That's amazing. And you touched on something, I'd love to just finish with this question, and it's a big one, so apologies. But when you mentioned their autism as a disability, I know some autistic people, myself included, have a mixed relationship with calling ourselves disabled. And for a long time, I really did identify as a disabled person. And then I felt like that was holding me back when I was going out into the world. I was feeling always like I was extra vulnerable. And now I feel like there are days and situations that disable me because they are not suited to my needs. But in general, I don't know if I call myself a disabled person, although I do. I don't know. It's a really tricky one. I come in and out of loving that word and feeling empowered by it. And like, especially if I have to go on a plane, I'm all for the lanyard and the access, and bring me right up to my seat in the plane, please. I need that support in an airport. But day to day, I don't know, because there's still so much misconception and there's still so much bullying that goes on of disabled people. It doesn't feel safe to come out and say I'm disabled. I suppose that's my issue. Where
Okay.
do you
Yeah.
stand on all that?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I've been like I would be very much an advocate of the social model of disability, whereby it's society that's disabling rather than the person being innately disabled.
Yeah.
You know, we like people may have impairments and they'll look different across different experiences. Um, I again, you know, identifying as disabled is something that I have uh, struggled with because sometimes my experience of being disabled is actually a relatively privileged one.
Mm.
And so I feel conflicted sometimes because actually most of the time I have the capacity to advocate for what I need um, within the world in a way that some people don't have. Um, and and so I think it's problematic, but I think it is also then it does actually come with the responsibility to, yeah, okay, well, I can have that conversation in a way that somebody else might not be able to have it. And I can advocate, you know, personally, and therefore in a way that changes other people's awareness and acceptance and understanding. So um, as regards safety, I think the world is quite a frightening place in
Mm.
terms of feeling safe at the moment. And like today, I'm really feeling it because my son is walking like halfway home from school on his own for the first time today. He's like having none of being picked up anymore. So that kind of like the miscellaneous unsafe things in the world, and that's through people being like chronically disempowered
Mm.
by socioeconomic circumstances, by just systems, broken systems, mean that the world doesn't feel like a particularly safe place to be at the moment. And and yeah, I suppose around disability, it's the same thing, but I think it's been so embedded in my work and in my practice for the last number of years that I haven't stopped to question it a huge amount. Um, but it's yeah, it's a tricky one, and I think like everybody has the right to self-identify as they want to, and they also have the right for how they self-identify to change at different times and in different circumstances. So I don't like criticize anybody for how they label or don't label themselves, or how they might label themselves in certain circumstances, but not in others. Because I think we're always going to be in relationship to our environment and to the kind of structures that control that environment. And you have to, in a sense, be flexible in how you, and allow for flexibility in how people kind of adapt to those different environments and circumstances.
Definitely. And I think it's important as well to mention that how I show up one day in a supermarket may be very different to how I show up the next week in a supermarket. Some days I'm able for it, other days I'm not. So, the picture of disability changes all the time too. Which is not the same, I suppose, with certain conditions that might disable you, but certainly for myself, my experience, some days I feel disabled by it, other days I feel absolutely grand. And it really depends what's on the agenda and where I'm at with my spoons, my energy allocation as well. It's just been amazing chatting to you, Jody, and I could go on all day because there's still 100 things I want to talk to you about, but I think we'll have to wrap it up here. But what's coming up for you next as a creator? Where can people follow you and find your work? Because it's so relevant, I think, to so many people.
Oh, thanks so much. So yeah, the next show that I have coming up is Grace, which will be at Dublin Theatre Festival, and will also be in a festival in Galway in October. And then after that, I'm taking a little bit of time out to kind of redevelop like a dance and physical practice, because I'm originally a dancer and not at all. And like all of this, like writing and acting and all of that came much later. But yeah, for Grace will be on at the Pavilion Theatre from the 27th to the 29th of September, I think at 4 p.m. and then 1 p.m. and 4 p.m. on the Saturday and Sunday. There's also a schools performance. And people can book tickets through Dublin Theatre Festival or the Pavilion Theatre. I'm terrible at kind of like social media and all of that kind of stuff, but I'm sure I'm findable on some platforms.
I'll find a few links for tickets and I'll put them underneath in the show notes. Brilliant.
Thanks a million.
And can people follow you on Facebook or somewhere? Do you have a presence?
Yeah, I am on Facebook. Yeah. So I may not be like responsive, but I'm definitely there.
Thank you so much, Jody. It's been so enlightening, and you've given me loads of food for thought, and hopefully we'll get on again and have another chat about some more stuff, maybe in the next season of the podcast.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Niamh.
Thanks a million. Have a lovely day.
You too.
Bye-bye. Thanks for joining us. I loved Jody's wonderful self-care practices. Sea swimming, yoga and meditation are so beneficial to the nervous system. Make sure to catch her play Grace in the Dublin Theatre Festival. The links are in the show notes. I'm setting up a resources page on the Wellness Clinic's website with all my favourite neurodivergent content creators, so check that out if you need some support, or you can email me through my website at any time. Thanks for joining us.